Welcome to episode 51 of Now and Men, the podcast on men, masculinities and gender equality. How are things with you, Stephen?
Hi Sandy, and hi everyone. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Boomerang people again today. Things are well with me, thanks. Just reflecting on our last episode on climate change. It is somewhat uncomfortably warm here in Melbourne at the moment, and I always get very hot when we're recording the podcast anyway, so hopefully I won't be too sweaty by the end of this. How are you doing?
I'm fine. By contrast, it's been unbelievably cold here in the UK. So fairly soon I'm off to do a bit of overwintering in Spain. So it won't interrupt the podcast, but that's what I'm off to do. So anyway, we're going to return today to our traditional format of interviewing an expert for the episode. We're delighted to be joined today by Aleks Dimitrijevic, who is speaking to us from near Valletta in Malta, which, for those listeners who may not know, it's an island in the Mediterranean, just south of Sicily. It's got a population of just over 500,000 people, and Malta used to be a British colony. Apologies for that, Aleks, but became independent in 1964 and has been an EU member since 2004.
Yes, and Aleks is a co-founder and president of Men Against Violence and also a member of the steering group of MenEngage Europe. Men Against Violence is a small NGO working mainly on violence prevention, addressing gender-based violence in particular, gender inequality and gender stereotyping. And they carry out workshops in schools and also collaborate with women's rights organisations to organise training for groups like the police, medical professionals and civil servants.
And Alex's own research and expertise is on the theme of backlash to gender equality and the activities of men's rights groups and their modus operandi, which will be our main topic today. So hi Aleks, and thanks so much for coming on Now and Men.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and to speak to you about these things.
Before we get into our main topic, perhaps you could give us a little insight into the Maltese context in relation to gender. So, as far as I understand it, Malta has made considerable progress in recent times, legalising divorce in 2011, which admittedly is very late, but also subsequently gay marriage. And yet Malta and I think Poland are the only EU members with near total bans on abortion. And so women are forced to have the procedure abroad or risk prosecution. So is that right? And how does this issue stand now in Malta? And how have you and Men Against Violence been involved in campaigning for legalisation alongside women's organisations?
So Men Against Violence, we are a part of a coalition of NGOs and human rights NGOs. We stand at, I think, currently at around 11 or 12 that basically demand change in Malta reproductive rights situation, particularly Maltese law, which explicitly forbids and punishes abortion. And punishes both the woman who has one and the doctor who perform it or prescribe the pills. So the situation is like that. It's one of the paradoxes of this little lovely island I live on, is that yes, certain things came late, and as you mentioned, divorce happened only after a referendum, and a very hard-fought referendum. But Malta experienced a drastic and rapid progress in terms of gender equality, especially when it comes to recognition of LGBTIQ rights. Actually, as a matter of fact, Malta has been on top of ILGA as most gay-friendly country in the world for a number of years running now. But, whilst this progress was so rapid and it literally happened over a span of 6-7 years, the progress when it comes to women's rights, particularly when it comes to reproductive rights, has been painstakingly slow. The law that is still on the book has been there since mid-1800s, which, so basically you're talking good 170, 180 years. And only after big pressure and only after a woman had to be airlifted from Malta in order to have an abortion abroad and not to die here, has law been changed, allowing doctors to save women's life but only under condition that three doctors agree that her life is in an imminent risk and that she deserves the abortion. That's where we are. And that was changed recently, maybe a year ago. But up to that point in time, not even that exception existed.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see the prospects for lifting the ban? Do you think you're making progress towards that, or?
Well, we are currently. I don't know. I mean, obviously, as an activist, I'm hopeful, and I do believe that my work and our work is not for nothing. But I think that it will take a bit of more time. I mean, we are, as I said, we are working on it. We are collaborating with our brothers and sister organizations from abroad. We are working locally with local politicians who have our ear, whose ear we have. And we are trying to work the ground more rather than have some sort of media or otherwise campaign. But yes, we are hoping actually that there is something that I think we all can agree on, is that the surveys actually show that maybe people are not in favor abortions taking place here or legalizing or making it available and things like that. But everybody agrees, or vast majority at least, agrees that women should not go to prison for having an abortion. And I think that we are hoping and we are working on having it at least decriminalized, that law, if not legalized. Regardless of the law, we know we have academics in our ranks who have done the research, and we know that progressively over the span of last few years, the number of abortions, women who have abortion in Malta has progressively grown. In terms of having it done locally by ordering the pills, because abortion, unlike beliefs or presentation in the media, especially coming from the right wing, vast majority of abortion nowadays consists in taking 2 pills, which can be sourced from a reputable reproductive rights organization. And we know for a fact that anything over 400 women every year basically orders abortion pill from abroad, takes them locally, and basically in that act criminalize themselves by doing it. So the abortion ban just doesn't work as something that any pro-choice activists have known for a very, very long time.
Right. And is the main opposition to change coming from, well, you say it's coming from the right wing, but is it also religious based as well? What are the barriers to?
Of course, we are an island. We are a tiny island, insular island in the sea, where church, obviously, and church teachings, the Roman Catholic Church, have been very strong, and the church for many, many years or hundreds of years had a very strong hold on Maltese moral, ethical thinking, on what is taught in schools and how the subjects are tackled. And I mean, the second article of Maltese constitution basically states that the Roman Catholic Church is the arbiter of right of wrong in the country, and that the Roman Catholic Church has a duty and a right to teach what is right and what is wrong. And so yes, the church has a big influence, there's no question about it. The whole thing of these beliefs that life starts at conception, that from a moment of conception embryo or a blastocyst is of equivalent value to a life of a woman, that all definitely comes from a religious belief. And then when you add that for many especially before internet, Malta is an insular environment, separated from the mainland Europe. So the influences or knowledge or thinking of every kind coming from abroad and changing maybe the discourse in the country was very limited until obviously very recently, last 2 decades or so. And yes, it's obviously being insular. It's a conservative environment. There is a lot of, even in the progressive or our sort of left-wing parties, so to say, which are more liberal than left. There are people who are, socially conservative in some way, whilst progressive in other, as our situation or progress that we made on LGBTIQ rights shows. So it's, yes, there is church, there is history, there is being insular, self-contained, small environment, where opinions haven't been, there is no tradition of challenging opinions or beliefs, and that's why the progress on this particular thing was very, very, very slow.
Yeah, and I guess working in this area must be pretty challenging for you. I mean, I think it's not just you, but your family as a whole are involved in this sort of area too, aren't they? So how do you handle that, and how do you keep going?
You get used to it. You grow thicker skin, I guess. That's one thing. I mean, in order to explain, my better half, my wife, also runs her own. She's a founder of Women's Rights Foundation, one of the most prominent women's rights foundation organizations on the island. And so basically, for me, that's how it all started, with following the resistance to actually anything that Women's Rights Foundation was coming up with, in terms of advocating for change of violence on changing the laws on violence on women in Malta, on reproductive rights especially. They were, I believe, the first organization that in 2017 came up with a position paper on sexual and reproductive health and rights, which actually advocated, one of the recommendation was decriminalization and legalization of abortion. And there was a lot of backlash to it, and that's how it all basically started for me, as taking interest out of safety for my family. And
have you faced actual risks for towards your family?
My wife and my daughter have received a number of death threats online.
Wow.
Coming from local people, and obviously because these pro-life or whatever they refer to themselves as anti-choice movements, she even received the death threats from abroad. There was a nice man from Texas who wished to see my wife beheaded. And so you can understand that in a social media context, in a commentary section context, where everybody and anyone can choose to have anonymity and say whatever they want, that was triggered my interest in a whole this idea of backlash and resistance to basically progressive change.
Mm-hmm. And were you ever tempted to actually stop because of the threats you faced?
My wife and me, a few years back, because you can imagine the conversation that take place we have three kids. 2 are already adults and they left the nest. We still have 1 teenager at home. And for years, us doing this, the conversation at home are always revolving around, violence, sexual violence, human trafficking as well, because my wife does a lot of work in that field as a lawyer, and so we always thought, we speak about violence at our home so much that, I don't know, exposing our children to it might be some form of violence too. Luckily, my daughter grew to be activist herself, although she's now moved country and she's trying to change a little bit her life. But we had a discussion, my wife and me, and basically we said, how long can we keep on doing this? And at some point in time we said, okay, we settled at the figure of 12 years. 12 years, and we're gonna call it a day. We're gonna retire and sort of pass on the to somebody else to do these things. But I think we lost track. My wife's organization just last year celebrated, not last year, year before, celebrated 10 years of existence, and 2023. Mine, Men Against Violence, celebrated 10 years in 2024. So we still have at least a couple of years, but knowing us, it's not going to be that short.
Wow.
Well, and
Too involved.
So perhaps to move onto that topic which we trailed at the beginning of Backlash, Alex, could you perhaps tell us a little bit, first of all, about, what do you mean by this term? How do you kind of understand it? I mean, did it come from this book by Susan Faludi in 1991, Backlash, the Undeclared War Against Women? I mean, we see a lot of discussion now about gender ideology, for example, anti-gender movements. Could you just say a bit more about how you understand it?
Well, okay. So in a nutshell, the world is constantly changing. It's not cast in stone, and there was always historically and in any way there was always a resistance to social changes. And so backlash in terms of existing in history or existing as a factor is nothing new. Backlash, basically how I see it, and when we are talking about current backlash, it's a basically resistance, organized or not, resistance to progressive social change that took place. I wish to say in last few decades, but I think that for some of them they would like to move us back to much older times. So minority groups and oppressed groups are gaining more rights, more recognition, and more equality, and as opposed to groups who would like to preserve the status quo in a society where they experience or they enjoy certain privileges that are granted to them through a established social order, and they perceive the equality as a loss of those rights and obviously loss of these privileges, and they obviously resist that change.
Yeah, and what are some of the main issues that this backlash is focusing on? I mean, as you said, it's changed in character over time. Are there particular issues which you would say are being focused on, in particular, at this moment in time, whether that's in Malta or Europe or globally?
It's a global movement. There's no I say that it always existed. There have always been angry men, that opposed women's emancipation and women's rights, as much as they were good guys, the men who sort of supported women in their quest for equality. But prior to existence of internet and social media and places where people can congregate from a different parts of the world in large numbers, those were either small organizations or they were individuals, as I said, angry men who would write a nasty book about women, but in order to create some sort of movement and have companionship, have people joining these men in these anti-women or anti-women's emancipation movement, they would have to, buy that book, read that book, get in touch with this person who might live on a different country, different city, different continent, so they had no power in numbers, and they had no power of outreach that they currently have. And I think the biggest issue is, you mentioned the word, the expression gender ideology, and the labeling gender as gender ideology is actually one of the parts of these processes that are taking place in backlash, because once you label something as ideology, you can dismiss it as irrational belief that some people might believe in, be fanatic about it, and be extremist about it. Like you can the label of extremist feminists and feminazis and all these kind of words that are used to kind of label any progressive people or progressive that are advocating for some sort of progressive change in equality. So yes, there is a lot going on, and it takes different tangents in different places, and somewhere it's worse, somewhere it's better, but the underlying base that sort of feeds into this is resistance to gender equality, that sort of unites these different and quite different kinds of movements, but it is giving them a lifeline where they can connect and they have something to base their cooperation sort of on.
One example of that, perhaps, which comes to my mind, at least in the UK, I think a little bit here in Australia as well, perhaps, is around, and given, I work in the area of gender-based violence predominantly, and you'd think, well, everybody would be in support of measures to tackle gender-based violence, surely, but then perhaps not, actually, when you encounter some of this backlash that, for example, in terms of prevention work of the kind you're doing, right? Education in schools, like education around consent, healthy relationships, LGBTQ issues, for example. Is that an example of what you're talking about? Like pushing back against also things like the Istanbul Convention as well, like measures to actually,
Yes, actually, it's a very good example. You're mentioning the Istanbul Convention and their introduction in a number of countries in Europe. The resistance to it was very, very obvious. And I don't know if now Sandy will remember several years back, I wrote an email to MenEngage Europe members and say, listen, there is a petition being organized by all these regressive groups, and to be sent to the Council of Europe to change the wording of Istanbul Convention, to drop the word gender completely from it. And I was like, okay, we need to do something about it. And there was like various women's rights organizations and organized a counter petition to it, just to sort of create a balance, because obviously these organizations, they exist, and they are of various kind of coming from various fields of interest, from obviously anti-choice organization who are very much against introduction of reproductive rights, equality, and so on and so forth, to very religious groups and organizations who are then, obviously see gender as a intrusion on their beliefs, and obviously to a whole bunch of right-wing, extreme right-wing, far-right, or whatever you want to call them, politicians, political parties, organizations, which see this as something that they can sort of ride on, and it obviously matches their in many ways their beliefs. Where you can see it is that in some places, like for instance in Eastern Europe, it's very difficult to speak about gender at all, because through propaganda and through activism as I get these regressive movements, gender is considered something that is a risk, a danger to their country, to established order, to their traditions, to the culture. So we have, I know at least of one organization who does this kind of work that I do, that goes to school and works on preventing violence, gender-based violence and other types of violence, and giving kids sort of some tools to recognize, inequality, bad relationship, what to do, how to do, and things like that. So we have an organization, I know in Bulgaria, for instance, that cannot say we are offering prevention of gender-based violence to schools, because once they mention the word gender, it's less likely that the head of school or whoever is in charge will actually allow them, because parents might hear and they might oppose and create problems. So they have to come up with different ways how they name these trainings and these workshops in order to continue this work, which is necessary for safety of these kids. So it's a very what this group and what their propaganda does. It's actually very, very dangerous and very risky, and puts kids and adults and women and minority groups at higher risk unnecessary.
I'm thinking it's actually tragic, given that one of the conditions for accession to the European Union was adherence to a whole range of human rights instruments and gender equality instruments, and things obviously gone backwards in many countries, not just EU members, but other states as well.
Yes, and that is very true, except for Malta. There is one little detail. When Malta negotiated joining European Union, one of the main arguments, one of the big arguments against Malta joining EU, people who oppose, said that if we join EU, Malta will have to have abortion and abortion laws. So the negotiator of Malta's accession to European Union negotiated a particular clause in the accession treaty, which basically says that regardless of how abortion is seen or whatever happens with abortion rights in European Union, that Maltese laws will overtake precedent over European laws. And that clause actually exists in the accession treaty. Yeah. It's one of the base laws of European Union. So Maltese women have that little privilege of being probably the only international treaty in the world that actually controls and regulates their bodies.
Wow!
So
it's amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible, but true.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a slightly different question, which is, to what extent is the weaponising of men's grievances and anxieties a key aspect of backlash in your view?
Oh, of course, it's there is no question. Masculinity is actually let me put it this way: masculinity as a singular historically has never been really questioned. Historically, man was made in the image of God. There's no question about, the man is it, and everything has to be measured through the greatness of man, and that didn't change until there was basically women movements that, by starting to question the role of women, position of women, and what definition of what womanhood is and what women are supposed to be and represent in the society. Once women started questioning that, and once women started and showing that traditional roles and expectation and what have you are basically not based in any fact, and once women started intruding men's spaces, that actually is what caused, if man's role is not to be the leader of the family, women can do that. If man's role is not to provide, if women can provide. If we also, if once it started this deteriorating, this standard expectation of what man is supposed to be, we basically entered the era of masculinity being in flux, being in experiencing change and questioning what masculinity needs to be. So especially needs to be or is, and we are entering the era of masculinities and understanding that there is no one right way of being a man, and that causes, I think, insecurities in many. Security that, the binary system provided, putting things and people in the neat little boxes, of roles, expectation, duties, and so on and so forth. And once that system starts crumbling, of course, I think that this causes a lot of insecurities, a lot of questions, a lot of, I'm going to say, even paranoia in some men. And that is a very, very fertile ground for some rather unsavory characters to tap in. into this and feed of it and feed into it as well.
Yeah.
Like we have these toxic influencers and so forth.
Who do you see then as the main sort of men's rights groups, activists? I mean, presumably they differ from place to place, as you've said in other answers, but are there some key groups?
Yes, of course. I mean, if you obviously some very organized and recognizable groups are, although they might not have a formal sort of setup, but like you have obviously men rights, which basically just go by that organization. And I think even if you go on Reddit, they're the big one of the big Reddits with I don't know how many million users or close to million users. You will obviously have what I find very interesting group, which is called themselves Men Going Their Own Way. Which is, men who believe that they are being used by the society and their contribution to society is not appreciated, and they want to withdraw themselves from society. So they are interested in learning, cooking, cleaning, taking care of themselves, surviving, and these kind of things. And then we have obviously the very dangerous groups, which I find they should be under some sort of observation, which are pickup artists, which again they hold these beliefs that women are psychologically, biologically, evolved to be attracted to certain traits in men, which is strength, power, leadership, and that if you exert these characteristics, these qualities, you can actually have more success with women. But most of their techniques, because they organize classes and they sort of teach young men these things, but in most of the places, some of these techniques would be considered sexual harassment, if not sexual assault. Obviously, incels, which are so-called involuntary celibate, they are particularly dangerous. Their beliefs are so vast and so crazy that it's hard to summarize them easily, but basically those are usually socially awkward, insecure young men who believe that because of their looks, their appearance, or their interests, that women are not interested in them or would not be interested in them, and that actually provides a good starting point towards hate towards women and anything related. So some of them believe that they have a right to a woman. They have a right. They want government to, introduce laws where every man would be assigned a woman of his choice. Their hatred towards women is so hard that they actually celebrate school shooters, who go and target particularly women or girls from their classrooms and things like that. Like, as you know, as the white ribbon as a movement, how it started because of one of the boys who was particularly hateful towards women, killed number of them in Canada. But there are many, and some, and they keep on coming. There is now, they're called, not latest because they've been a while, but they're called passport bros. So these are men who say basically, the women in the Western world, especially in the Western world, are too uppity. The feminism ruined women. So we have wealth and we have valuable passports because we live in the Western countries, which are well off. So we use our passport to travel to poor countries. To travel to Taiwan and Thailand and Brazil and look for the places where there are women who are, out of financial insecurity and disparity, they would be willing to, because we will use our passport as a sort of a sale to sell ourselves to these women and use these women for our own purposes. Some would like, to find a virgin, young, trained, obedient woman from Asian country or somewhere like that to bring to their, to basically be a sex slave or something like that to them. Some would be just for looking for some sexual pleasure experiences using sort of, as I said, their wealth and their origin country of origin as a tool. And then we have the influencers like Andrew Tate, and Andrew Tate is one of the most famous one, but there are many of little Andrew Tates which come up with these nonsensical, crazy stuff, and obviously, and then sometimes they have support, sometimes by academics, like we obviously know Peterson and so on and so forth, and like their group of academics, I can tell you, that publishes their own journal on masculinity, but it's nothing. It's all about blaming women rather than looking at the problems that masculinities are actually facing, you know. But they're self-published, so it's okay. They give credibility to these crazy stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's incredible how this stuff has gained traction over time as well, isn't it? And become more visible, really.
And
yes, because it's easy. Because it's so easy, you know. There was, I think, one British comedian, Dara O'Brien, said in one of his shows, listen, we all want to find out, you know, answers to difficult questions, you know, and these are some difficult issues of gender, of equality, of place of men, women, and we are in a state of flux, and it's complex and what have you. But if somebody comes and gives you a simple bullshit answer, you know it's a bullshit answer. You know, there are no easy solutions to these questions, and it requires a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of understanding. But you know, if there is a guy like Tate and who says, you know, look, do like me, you know, be strong, be powerful, and you will get what you want in life. That's a message that you know, it's easy to understand, easy to comprehend, easy to intake. And whilst the real issues that are facing men, and they are serious issues, starting from you know, the suicide rates, which are ludicrous for young men, psychological effect that psychological and otherwise effect that patriarchal structure have on men. You know, that, you know, women feminist authors have been calling for it for a long time. That you know, we should really look into these. We are very much aware of patriarchal chains on women, and women been trying really, really hard to break through. We need to look. They have the same effect. And you mentioned Susan Faludi as her book. I mean, Susan Faludi, who is a, you know, liberal feminist, and who wrote that book Backlash, which she documented how every little progress that emancipation of women. And women, any little progress that women made, there was a backlash that sort of worked hard in the background in different ways, through legislation, policy, and things like that, to actually minimize that. The book that is less spoken about, her next book, is called Stiffed, where she basically documents how that same patriarchy, that same patriarchal chains are actually hurting men. Hurting men on many, many different levels. And so these things are not you know, we don't have a. I will go back to the narrative. We don't have that narrative. Our narrative needs to be explained. We need to be able to digest it in easy terms, but that's very hard. And it's especially when you have people who have vested interest in preserving the status quo or going back. And so we have a role as men to sort of bring these narratives to other men in such a way that they can understand it and see the usefulness and benefit not only to men but to everybody else in promoting some sort of positive and non-competing masculinities rather than toxic, and that is offered by these influencers and these kind of movements.
So you were talking before there, Alex, I suppose, about how this backlash is becoming increasingly mainstream. And I guess it's interesting to figure out how this is playing out in mainstream politics as well. For example, there's an interesting recent book called Anti-Gender Politics in the Populist Moment, which argues that opposition to kind of so-called gender ideology has actually become a key element in the rise of right-wing populism more broadly. So how do you see the relationship between these two things?
There is a very good research. There is a European Parliamentary Forum, EPF, which is an NGO, and there is this data scientist Neil Data, coincidentally that's his name, they've been doing research on these. They're mainly concerned with reproductive health and rights, and they've been doing research in these movements for a long time now. And so many of the things that I'm talking about are coming from research that they have conducted. They have, as I said, an underlying base that actually works for them. They use the expressions like gender ideology, and they start using terminology like family rights or our religious rights are being damaged or taken away by people who are promoting gender equality and so on and so forth. They also, what they do, they tend to present themselves as victims. They're victim of the system that actually denies them the rights to their religion or to their family, which is not true. I mean, it is only true in a sense if you believe that controlling or having power over others is somehow your right, because rights belong to an individual. So having other people live their life the way they want is not under control of a religion or a system or a political regime where some majority has privileges and control over others. And that is as I said, that is very easy for a political class to how shall I say, cash in on that and use that and steer that fire further for their political benefit. And we've seen that happening obviously in the US with first election of Trump, and we see that even now with the second election of Trump, meaning showing that it is more than becoming mainstream. It is the mainstream. We are seeing moderate centrist right-wing parties sort of adopting and some of the language and some of the issues of the extreme right, because they are losing ground to these organizations, these groups and these political movements. And as I said, this is what they find, this unifying line, this something that they can agree on, and they are ready to compromise and ignore their differences, and they are very well funded. They're very well funded beyond beliefs. They are massive fundraising organizations in the US that are pumping money into these movements and these organizations, and they have been also pumping money into Europe. And and for all the talk, they sort of we are fighting gay agenda, we are fighting feminist agenda, which is based on it doesn't exist. It's just a quest for equality. Whilst in 2013, they set up, these organizations got together and they wrote out a document of full 120 pages, and they title it Agenda Europe. Restoring Europe to natural order. They're not even pretending that it's not agenda, and they're as if their agenda is not what they want is not agenda. It's what are you doing? And we also seen it now in America with Project 2025. They very clearly state what they want to do and what kind of society they want to create or have, and whilst they are blaming feminist movement, LGBTIQ movement, progressive movement for trying to socially re-engineer the society, they are very clear that they want to socially engineer society in their own image, and they're very open about it. Unfortunate, yes, it became mainstream. It's because of financial insecurity. We had international financial crisis. What is happening in the world. Some rules of engagement liberal democracies have established for many years are being lost. Some traditional protocols of understanding and behavior. And obviously we, as much as we live in the era of information, we live in the era of misinformation, where the particular interests which are again well funded have practically unlimited, in some cases unlimited sources of finance, where their opinion and their agenda can be propagated at a very to masses, and obviously that sinks in, and it's unfortunate, but it's true. And I'm guessing this is part of it. As men, we have a role to play there and see what we can do about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you've presented a huge range of challenges, in the last few minutes, and you've identified how right-wing governments, political parties, ultra-conservative religious groups, social influencers, and so on, have all been promoting this kind of agenda. And I was interested. You mentioned Agenda for Europe as well. I mean, you presented on that recently, and I was really not aware how sort of developed the plans were, and how it's not just opportunistic. It's more planned than that. But it makes me think. It makes me wonder. And this feels like sort of limited response. But what can men and boys organisations do to respond to some of the challenges that you've presented? I mean, there's obviously things that political parties can do and other civil society actors can do, and so on and so forth. But what about the organisations working with men and boys? What do they need to do?
Well, I'm obviously talking from a personal perspective on what I have been doing for the last decade or so. Is we need to show the alternatives. I think that's one of the main roles that men-based or men engaging men organizations have a role to play, is by showing the alternatives and showing that there is a different way, that way is not only realistic, possible, and true and real, but it's beneficial not only to women or LGBTI, but it actually benefits everyone, men included. And I think we have a duty to create narratives, to create spaces for boys and men where they can be free to express their concerns. They can be free to express their insecurities. Where they are free to if they lack of knowledge, if they possess a lack of knowledge of something, where they can ask freely for an explanation or for alternatives. And we as a men-run or men-centered organization, pro-feminist men organization, I think this is where we have a power to affect change. As Patrick Stewart, one of my favorite actors, who if you did not know, he was brought up in a very violent family. His father was a very violent man, and he's very open about it. And he said something along the line, "Nothing in this world change until men of my age and gray hair decide or help that change happen." So I'm a gray-haired man, I'm a middle-aged gray-haired man of particular position and privilege in the society, and we have an obligation towards everyone to work on that change to the best way we can.
How would you, as you've said before, Alex, like what we're up against here is quite huge. These organizations that are pumping out this stuff are clearly well funded. And as a side note, I was wondering if you could say anything about that. Where is this funding coming from?
Well, yes, of course. I can tell you that when it comes to US, obviously they have these what they call PACs, which basically are fundraising PAC, and they get money from everyone, from the churches and small donation to the billionaires. You had Koch brothers that been financing, which are billionaires that been financing these kind of movements for decades now. Not to mention that I forgot the name, so I apologize, but you can look it up. One particular organization has received 1 billion endorsement, $1 billion US. I'm not talking million, billion. From one very extremely rich billionaire who died, and he left them a legacy of 1 billion to do as they pleased. And so basically this organization has $1 billion to spend on these kind of cases and causes. So they, for instance, what they do, I know that they finance little campaigns. In a sense, let's say that in a particular district there is a school and there is an election for the school board, so they will finance people who are opposed to trans rights in order to get them elected on this board, so that they can influence how the schools will operate and work and things like that. Again, going back to European Parliamentary Forum and the research done by them, that's their last report, which came out a couple of years back, which basically shows from the public transactions, from the something that is available in public and that they can research, they estimated that in the last 7-8 years, around $700 million was pumped in from US evangelical and these kind of organization PACs and stuff into organizations in Europe. And it's also known that there is a lot of old aristocratic families, rich European families that are very close to Vatican and and other positions of power, that they have been financing these causes as well. And the third and biggest source of information is coming from Russia, from Russian tycoons, and because it's politically obviously convenient and it works for a Russian political regime to sow a discord in Europe in any sort of way. So yes, they are very well funded, and they are the sources of their funding are known. They are not secret at all.
So I guess given what we are up against there, clearly we all have an important role to play here. So how do you think we can use language, I suppose, that actually will connect with boys and men, when there are these powerful forces trying to pull them in other directions? What do you think, how can we actually reach out to boys and men and, in ways that they might listen to us and engage with us, whilst also holding true to our feminist values at the same time?
Yes, it's a difficult, as I said before, it's a difficult to tread on this, because, as I said, the message that they are receiving from these sources are very simplified and very, very appealing, in a sense that appeals to traditional masculinity, appeals to traditional values, which are easily to understand, and many are still being brought up in these sort of traditional environments at home or whatever, where these structures exist and make sense. So they are need preserving. I think when you said staying true to our feminist values, staying true to equality values, we need to find narratives. We need to find ways of using language to reach these boys, but we cannot lose our ability to nuance. And I think this is where the importance of visibility of men working for men with boys and men in the spaces, in opening spaces which are usually not open to women. This is very important thing, because women are doing what they do for women's movement. They have always been doing it. I think access to places where women are usually not welcome or have hard time reaching, which is the locker room standard example of where men who are seeing this and who are willing to do something, where we need to reach and where we need to breach some traditionally held standards of behavior of other men. We need to challenge ourselves first. because there is a lot as individuals that we have to there is a lot of introspection, how I do and what I do and how I live and how what effect I have on the people around me. And then we have to be ready to challenge or to welcome, both challenge and welcome other men into understanding that this is something that we ought to do, that we need to do, that is beneficial not only for men, but beneficial for everybody we care about, and beneficial for everybody that as men we care about, and the issues that we care dearly about, our families, our friends, our women are not an abstract hanging somewhere as a thought. Those are real human beings, and these women are, I hate saying this, but they are around us, they live with us, they're part of our lives. We have an interest in helping them and supporting them, not only because we are related to them or we have a relationship with them in some way, but because women are human beings and they are our companions, they are our equal in every way on this planet, and we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to them to use the power that we have in order to benefit everybody else and ourselves.
Oh, thank you so much, Alex. Yeah, that's incredibly powerful and motivational. So thank you for giving it a bit of time to speak to us, and also for the brilliant, brave work you're doing in Malta and beyond.
Thanks from me too.
Thank you.
Very powerful words and insights, and you've given us a lot to think about, so thank you so much.
Thank you again, and really thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Pleasure. That's our absolute pleasure.
So, Stephen, I found it incredibly humbling listening to Aleks talking towards the start of the conversation about, the impact on his family, really, and, the effects of the activism that they're involved in, and the threats they've had, and how they are managing to, navigate through that. All I can say is I think that's very humbling. But what did you think of the conversation?
Oh, yeah, no, I totally agree with you, Sandy. I mean, lots of things came to my mind, one of which connecting to our previous episode about the issue of climate change, because I think that connects very much to this as well, doesn't it? That I think there are connections between the backlash against gender equality and the backlash against, climate action, that we see overlaps in the groups advocating for the backlash there. We see a lot of misinformation and disinformation about climate change, as Aleks said. Also, the idea that we can kind of ignore it or dismiss it, in these very masculine terms of the kind of, that strong man, the Donald Trump type saying, drill, baby, drill. There's quite a kind of macho posturing there, isn't there? That, that we can dismiss that. We don't need to worry about it. We're not vulnerable. And I think that, that's one issue with another issue where there are overlaps. And also, I think as a specific example of that as well, I know at the last COP, COP29, there were discussions being had about the need to talk about gender equality in relation to climate change and the need for gender responsive approaches. But some countries were pushing back on that, and were actually, exactly as Aleks was saying, particularly pushing back on this language of gender being included in some of the policies and stuff. And the countries that were really against that, it was, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, the Vatican. So I think that's worth noting.
And I guess associated with that is, sort of broader political forces as well. The reality of so many right-wing focused governments taking over. Not just that, though, but also that, governments theoretically of the left are, tacking to the right in order to, maintain their position. And, it appears that the progressive left have been very poor at responding both to the misinformation, but also the reality of what's going on in terms of analysis and narrative and action on the right.
Often just giving legitimacy to some of because as you said, they've often ended up saying the same things as the right or even the far right, and it ends up giving those arguments legitimacy, doesn't it? And I think another thing which you just see time and time again is progressive forces fighting amongst ourselves, and I think that is another big reason why we are where we are, really. So that's something which we really desperately need to overcome. And that makes me think as well, think about history. Think about, the Second World War, what happened there. That was always something that fascinated me growing up. How did the Nazis come to power? How did fascists come to power in so many countries across the world? And I always thought to myself, what would I do if I was in that situation? But that always felt incredibly abstract and unrealistic. But it feels like we are in a situation a bit like that now, without wishing to be overly dramatic or anything. So I think it shows us that we all need, this is a dire situation we're potentially facing, and if there was ever a need for all of us really to become active, I think this is certainly it.
No, certainly. And I guess, responding to your point, of course the Nazis came to power through the ballot box, and they were massively opportunistic in the way that they took power and used power, and there are some echoes of that on the far right today. What's happening in Austria, for example, and Hungary, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, well, and I just think something else just to add there as well is it's important to remember sometimes, I think, that, it's easy to be terrified and overwhelmed by this, but I think it's important to remember that these aren't necessarily majority opinions we're talking about. Like, as Aleks says, it's like the forces that are trying to drive forward these ideas, that they're using every tool that they can, because these aren't widely held ideas. If you think about something like abortion rights, most people in many countries, are very much in support of abortion rights, so it's easy to forget that. But I think that's, we need to not be kind of immobilized by these forces. It's not without hope. People aren't, we can't abandon the majority of the population to these views, because actually there is a lot of potential there for change and for solidarity, I suppose.
Another point which relates to that, which we did briefly discuss with Aleks after we had our conversation, was what's happening to younger people within this context as well, and it appears that younger men in particular are moving in a rightward direction politically, generally speaking. Young women less so, but or maybe even being more on the left. But there is an issue there about where young men are heading, and there's also an issue about where the new sort of generation of activists who, from a progressive standpoint, are going to come from.
Yeah, especially in the kind of field of kind of pro-feminist men, I suppose. Yeah, where is the next generation of young men going to come from there? And again, I think that just shows the responsibility on all of us to talk to the men in our lives, especially the younger men and boys, and to engage with them, and not abandon them or think that they're lost to these kind of views, but to do whatever we can to engage in a dialogue with each other, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, well, we should probably end there, shouldn't we, Sandy? But yeah, as always, thank you so much for listening, everybody. As always, do contact us at nowandmen@gmail.com if you have any questions or comments. We do now have an actual proper domain name, nowandmen.net, if you want to find us there. And of course, we have a Facebook page, facebook.com/nowandmen. Please do leave a review of the podcast wherever you listen to it. And we'll be back with another episode soon. And yeah, take care of yourselves. And I hope you have a lovely time in Spain, Sandy.
Well, indeed. So do I. Adios. Hasta luego.
Well, I suppose in these dark times, we all also need to engage in a bit of self-care, rest and relaxation sometimes. So yeah.
That's the plan.
Very good. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.